Today we're going to talk about overcoming communication barriers in a relationship. If you have communication barriers in a relationship, it will struggle. People literally struggle to express their feelings when they have communication issues. They're not able to express their thoughts, their emotions, how they feel. And this has happened to, I guess, a lot of us. It has happened to me, a situation where for several reasons, we were not able to communicate properly. And obviously it played a role in making the relationship suffer, because not just being able to show how one was feeling, it led to misunderstandings, it led to hurt feelings, and it can even lead to resentment. And sometimes, yes, these communication barriers can come from cultural differences to just pretty much lack of understanding. We will discuss the various communication barriers, talk about practical solutions to overcome them if you're dealing with a communication issue or barrier in your relationship. First is to identify the barriers that is affecting effective communication in your relationship. When we talk about effectively communicating, it requires that you're actively listening. And not just actively listening, it requires that you are saying or expressing yourself clearly. So I would say clear delivery. Your partner or whoever you're communicating with needs to know what you're saying. Your partner needs to be sure of what you're listening to. So again, it requires active listening, clear delivery, and mutual understanding. It's not one person understanding what's being said, it's both understanding what is said or what is communicated. We have so many common communication barriers. I'm just going to list a few of them. A lot of them I have experienced and they're kind of personal. And because of this, I've seen, not just me, I've seen a few other relationships suffer because of these barriers. And it's unfortunate that these are things that could have been dealt with. So just understanding, knowing, and doing, that goes a very, very long way, especially in the initial stage of your relationship. Number one is language barrier. One issue with not having an effective communication is language barriers. Now, let's say a partner speaks different language. Of course, you will be faced with difficulties, which is understandable, difficulties in communication. It is something that has affected even the best relationships, language barriers. So I would say one way to overcome this barrier is to learn your partner's language, or at least utilize tools that can help you overcome whatever language barrier you're facing in your relationship. So language barriers is important. I mean, you have English speakers who still have language barriers. You can have someone who is not very fluent in English. They're both English speakers, but one is not very fluent, or it could be misunderstanding in words or in the tone of the words. So it varies. So language barrier is one of them. Number two is cultural differences. If you're in a relationship where you come from different cultures, it is sometimes quite difficult to communicate, and what might be acceptable for one culture might not be acceptable or straightforward for another culture. In one culture, it may be offensive. In another, it's not. So cultural differences can lead to pretty much misunderstandings. It could lead to your partner thinking, people who come from this particular place are either, barbaric, or they act this certain way. So that's pretty much stereotyping and bias already playing a role in your relationship because of that cultural differences. So one way I would say to help overcome that, this barrier, is to understand and respect your partner's cultural background. It's important to do that. Just because a partner, if someone is from a very strong religious background and the other isn't, doesn't mean you just, dismiss them when they want to talk about certain issues. But the thing is, if you feel like this is not something you're not compatible in that regard, I think it's better to not get into a relationship where you start to feel the resentment for each other. I feel the best way to overcome this particular problem with cultural differences is to understand the culture of your partner and respect the partner's cultural background. Number 3 is lack of understanding. There's sometimes the ideas that one person is trying to convey can be a bit complex for the other or abstract for the other person. It could lead to confusion, and it could make it a bit challenging for the other person or for your partner to grasp the message, to understand the message. I imagine being in a situation where you say something to your partner and they probably didn't understand. So they didn't understand and they just let it slide. I feel if you do not understand what your partner has said, it's important to restate it and try to either you're going to rephrase the message or break it down. Let's say your partner says you're talking too fast. Okay, break down the complex concepts, use simple terms. And if he says you're talking too fast, talk slow. If she says, I can't grasp what you just said, make it simpler for them to understand. The thing about it is it works both ways. So the other person needs to tell them, which brings me to number 4, the listening barrier. The individual who just listens without understanding, then that could obviously lead to a lot of misunderstandings, because I recall saying something to someone and then I say it again and I'm wondering, did this person not just, I said this last week, why am I having to repeat myself? The person in question made it look like they understood what I had said. Now, if you do not understand what your partner has said, it's important to ask, could you repeat that again? I did not get that. So responding is important. And another time, some people just listen to respond instead of listening to understand. So when a partner feels like they're not being heard, this could lead to a lot of conflict. It could lead to frustration. And so one way of actually overcoming this sort of listening barrier is to practice active listening. If you don't get it, say it. Don't pretend like you get it. Don't assume, don't just, brush it off and say, okay. No, ask again. If an example to actively listen is to say, okay, you could ask your partner, could you paraphrase, your statement? Could you say that again? I didn't quite understand you correctly, or it sounds like you're saying this. I want to just confirm, is this what you mean? Or if you see that your partner is getting frustrated with certain things, you could ask, okay, it looks like you're getting frustrated right now. Can you talk more about what is causing you to feel this way? When you practice reflective listening and active listening, it helps in a lot of issues and conflict that people go through in a relationship. So as I said before, effective communication is very important to help you resolve, conflicts or problems that might arise within a relationship. Listening, communicating respectfully would help a lot to resolve conflicts. Finally, I would say communication barriers could be a sucker in a relationship. It can strain even the strongest of relationships. When you are not able to communicate properly, it could lead to a lot of misunderstandings, and it could eventually lead to you feeling distant from your partner. So it's important to communicate effectively. That is vital for any healthy relationship. Recognize if there is a communication barrier in your relationship. That's the first step in overcoming them. If you recognize them and you try to overcome them, people can learn ways to improve by actively listening, by respecting each other's cultural differences, mastering how to resolve conflict in the relationship, understanding the various problems, communication barriers in your relationship so that you can effectively communicate. As I said, we have language barriers, cultural differences, just simple lack of understanding or listening barriers. Hopefully, you're able to overcome any communication barrier you might have in your relationship, and I do wish you all the best. Thank you for listening. This is Thy Truth.
Meet you again at another episode of Thy Truth. Finding your truth with Efemena.